Evolutionary Network Hardcore 2.0, episode 82 coming your way. Today we're going to talk about Sustanon Quality from Euro-Pharma. And this one is going to be a really good one. Got Mobster here. He's a big Euro-Pharma fan. And we love these brands. We always talk about the top brands on this podcast. And Euro-Pharmacy, they make a really good Sustanon. So we're going to talk about Sustanon. A lot of you out there have never used Sustanon. Ironically, it was the first type of steroid that I used. And we're going to talk about what Sustanon is, what makes a quality Sustanon. We're going to talk about the different Sustanon blends Euro-Pharmacy has. And we're going to go over each of them and show you what's in them so you understand the method to the madness behind the different types of esters, testosterone esters that are in Sustanon. We're going to talk about how to run Sustanon, how to stack it. There's a lot of bad information out there about Sustanon on how to use it. And a lot of the guys putting out that information, they're the ones with a lot of views. They're the ones basically who are teaching people out there how to do it. So when you have people out there teaching the wrong way to do something to the masses, then you end up with people who are all running it wrong. And then they're finding out like, well, I don't like Sustanon. It doesn't work for me. Well, you're not running it right. So we're going to show you how to run it the correct way so you can get the most out of it. It's all about saving you money, saving you time, and saving you the headache. And then we're going to talk about why Euro-Pharmacy is so popular. If you've never used Euro-Pharma before, you're going to want to listen to this because it's going to show you the different reasons why Euro-Pharmacy is one of the most popular brands out there. So we're going to have a really good show. So let's start with what makes a quality Sustanon. I'll bring Lobster in to start us off on this.
Yeah, so we recorded a show recently, as Steve knows, where we were talking about what makes a quality injectable, and some of that information is exactly the same here, right? So let me start with that, and then I'll specifically talk about, with Steve, so what makes a quality Sustanon. Right, so number one, of course, is we want to buy a product from a trusted source. And we talk about this on a lot of shows, and there's a good reason for doing this. Simply put, you want to know that the product that you're buying, in this case Sustanon, contains exactly what you think it should, exactly what we want all Sustanons to include. You want to 100% have zero issues or almost zero issues, if 1 in 100 maybe, Steve, with regards to post-injection pain, because they've used quality oils, because they've got the benzoalcohol ratio correct, because they've been doing this a long time and they know exactly what they're doing. For example, we want products that are tested. We want, and this, I mean, look, I use this analogy when we did the show the other day, as Steve knows, and it's literally, we want to, if we go to the supermarket and we've got a favorite brand of tomato sauce, the ketchup, to put on our chips, to put on our fries, we don't want them to fuck about with the formula. We don't want the ratio of salt to be too high. We want to be able to recognize the brand, even if they change the label because they've got to for the law or something like that. We want to be able to recognize the product for what it is. We will be able to trust the product for what it is. And we want the goddamn right taste when we put it on our fries. Right? Companies will always try to mix and match mixed tomato ketchup and mayonnaise, do any number of things, but these tend to appeal to a very small percentage. The rest of them like what they like. And especially when you get to even these days, never mind my age, we tend not to go too far away from that. When it comes to putting a drug into your body, we absolutely want it to be exactly what it's supposed to be, not to be fucked around with and so on and so forth. So that's why we recommend brands. We know that products get tested. We know that they're not going to mess, as we like to call it, with a winning formula. We want to know. Well, I just had this conversation yesterday, Steve, at the gym. Why do I feel like this? Is two of my buddies. Why do I feel like this when I took this product, but I'm taking an identical amount of another company's products? And I said, well, maybe the first one was overdosed. Maybe the first one was correctly dosed, but the product you're taking now is underdosed, and so on and so forth. We don't want that. I said to him, literally, we want to know that the work that we do in the gym, the work that we do at the kitchen table with our knife and fork is on point. And then when we use an injectable, we want that injectable to help us to get exactly the same kind of feelings that we had before, and so on. There's still going to be variables with regards to tiredness and getting enough sleep, and if you've been working too hard, and so on and so forth. But like Sustanon, right now, Steve knows, and regular listeners will know, it's one of my top two bulkers. The other one we're going to talk about later on being Deca. And I know that if I use this amount of Sustanon and this amount of Deca, I will blow the fuck up. I will get strong. I know that if it's a quality Sustanon, a quality Deca, I know that for 2-3 weeks afterwards, I'm still going to be fucking huge. I'm still going to be fucking strong. Why? Because of the mix of esters in my body taking time to leave the soil. If that doesn't happen and all other variables are the same, then what the fuck's happened to the product? So we want a quality injectable to be as pain-free as possible, as sterile as possible, from a trusted company with exactly the kind of ratios that we know has worked in the past. And if all other things are taken into consideration, we know the result we're going to get. For example, those guys, listeners, users that get regular blood tests, we want to see our test levels at this level. Why isn't it at that level? What's happened to me, or what's happened to the product? What's changed? And if things haven't changed, it has to be the product. So this is, again, and this applies to any lab that we talk about, but specifically Euro-Pharmacies Sustanon. I know, because I've used Euro-Pharmacies Sustanon, the results I'm going to get on cycle. I've talked about what's happened back in the day. I could talk about what's happened recently. So we want to know what's going on. If it works for me, and not all testosterones do, not all orals do, if it works for me, I want to know that I'm going to get exactly those kind of results again and again and again. Of course, I cannot grow forever. I can't get stronger forever. But within reason, I should get more or less the same results. And that happens for me with a quality sus like that. What about you, Steve? What do you think on what makes a quality Sustanon?
So with Sustanon, we're going to talk about in the next segment the different blends that Euro-Pharmacies has. So the basic old school Sustanon is going to have 4 different testosterones,
Yes.
and it needs to be the correct ratio. You can't have too much propionate. You can't have too much decanate. It's got to be the right amount. Otherwise, when you're taking it on the schedule that you're supposed to take Sustanon on, you're not going to get the correct release of the esters. You're not going to get the correct ratios. So it's going to be pointless to do it. You might as well just buy your own testosterones individually and mix them in the same syringe if you're going to play that game. So it's very
Yes.
important right off the bat for me. Don't sell me something and claim that this is the ratio of the esters when it's not. When it's basically, we see this with brands out there with not quality Sustanon. Not quality Sustanon would be, I'm buying this Sustanon, I'm expecting it to be 4 different testosterone esters for a reason, because that's what I want. And I want the esters to kind of pick up after none. I'm going to explain how that works later in the podcast, because it's important that you understand how esters work. Once you figure that out, you'll be able to have more success on your cycles, and you're going to save money, and a lot of good things will happen. So if that's not happening, then you're basically cheating me. You're selling me something that I'm not buying. All right. I'm not going to the car dealership to buy a car for you to switch it on me. It's like in that movie back in your day, Mobster, Vacation with Chevy Chase. He goes at the
Yeah, yeah,
beginning of
yeah.
the movie to pick up his car because he's about to take his family from Chicago to California on a
Yeah.
trip. And the guy there, the dealer, is like, "Oh yeah, this is the car," and he's like, "This isn't the car I ordered. What the hell is this?" And then so it's the same thing with this. In this case, we don't know. We can't visually see anything except oil. So how do we know that this is real? So quality Sustanon really is, I'm gonna buy something that it is actually the Sustanon that I ordered. It is the 4 different testosterone esters. It is the
Yes.
correct ratios. That's the quality. The second thing is very important that Mobster brought up, because originally when I used Sustanon for the first time, the post-injection pain was absolute hell. Felt like I got hit by a baseball bat. All right. Now, Sustanon historically has had post-injection pain associated with it. And a big part of that is because it contains that propionate, that small amount of propionate, and that small amount of phenylpropionate. So those may have more, post-injection pain than regular esters, right? But with Euro-Pharmacies, they do a good job today. In modern times, there's no reason why, okay, this isn't 15, 20 years ago. Today, there's no reason why sources should not be producing high quality Sustanon that
Yep.
is injectable, where you're not going to feel like your muscle got hit by a baseball bat. And I'll tell you why that's important. Because let's say I inject today and I go to into my shoulder, right? And then tomorrow I'm gonna go do my chest day, and I'm on the bench. I'm pushing right on the bench press, and my shoulder is inflamed and red and swollen and in pain. That's gonna affect my workout. That's gonna affect me negatively to my workout. So there's really no reason. Now, back in the day, what we would do in that situation is what we would do is we'd inject after our workout, and then you're going to be sore for 2 or 3 days, and then you're not going to work that muscle for 2 or 3 days. But in today, there's no reason for that today. So, my point is when it comes to quality Sustanon, maybe, yeah, there will be a little bit of post-injection pain, but it shouldn't be where you have to literally alter your workouts and be scared to work a certain muscle group that day, because you know what? Today's my injection day. So, you're going to call up your buddy and say, you know what? I can't work the bench press for 3 days. So yeah, let's save the chest day till Saturday, because I'm injecting on Wednesday or I'm injecting on Tuesday. I got to wait till Saturday to do my chest. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. You should have the flexibility to work the muscle that you need to work and not run your training around what you're taking. So having quality Sustanon is no excuse today for companies and sources and brands to be putting out Sustanon that's going to cause those issues. So that to me is quality Sustanon, Mobster. I need the flexibility to know if I pin that Sustanon this morning, that later today in the evening when I go to the gym, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good.
I'll expand on this, Steve, because I said, well, sometimes we talk about competition cycles, and this applies, as I said at the beginning, on my first part, for all injectables. Imagine that you and I are going to do a competition stack, and we've got a competition coming up, and we're going to be using longer acting esters at the beginning, medium to shorter acting esters, especially shorter acting esters at the end. And we know what competition stacks are like. It's a combination. I think Steve's used the phrase chemical warfare. It's multiple PEDs. Now, if I'm going to be injecting with that level of frequency, and I don't, but as a competitor, I suspect I might have to, the last thing I want to do, not necessarily liking the simple fact of pinning myself, not even once a day, but multiple times a day for weeks, is a walking time bomb of pain and soreness and discomfort and whatever else. And then being starving, hungry, and depleted and everything else, and then killing it in the gym. It would just be one pain after another pain after another pain. And we don't see that anymore. We don't see it anymore because labs like Euro-Pharmacies have got everything down pat. They don't use the cheaper oils. They don't fuck the ratios on the benzoalcohol, like I said at the beginning. And especially when it comes to Sustanon, they use the right ratio of esters. Now, let's describe now, Steve, what esters are in Sustanon and why they're in. I'll let you start and I'll jump in as we go along.
Yeah, so Euro-Pharmacies keeps it simple. They have 4 different options. They have the Sus 250 15 milliliter. They have the Test Blend 10 milliliter. They have the Test Blend 250 1 milliliter in an amp. And then they have a Sus 500, which is a 15 milliliter vial. So 3 vials and 1 amp. And it's really simple. They do it basically according to the book. They've got, with the 250 version, the test propionate is going to be 30 milligrams. The test phenylpropionate is going to be 60 milligrams. The test isocapriate is going to be 60 milligrams. And the test decanate is going to be 100 milligrams. So that's going to be true with all their 250s. Now, with their 500 vial, 500 milligram a milliliter, Sustanon option, you take those milligrams and you just double them. So you go from test prop 30 to test prop 60. You go from test phenylpropionate 60 to test phenylpropionate 120. Same thing with the test iso. You go from 60 to 120. And then with the test decanate, you go from 100 to 200. So this is really cool because with this one, you can just inject 1 cc and it's going to give you 500 milligrams total of these 4 different esters. So that's really cool that they did that. And this is going to allow you, this is great for those of you who want to lower your injection frequency and lower the amount of volume that you're pinning. So this is a really good option that they did. And I'm going to explain in the next segment, how to run Sustanon and exactly what the method to the madness, but this is the correct Sustanon. This is the old school original Sustanon blend. And Omnidren used to be a little different, but now Omnidren is also the same way. So even those of you in Eastern Europe who are familiar with Omnidren, but you don't really know what Sustanon is, it's the same thing. Omnidren and Sustanon are the same thing, same exact blends, same exact ratios. And there's a method to the madness. Why are they putting in the test propionate at a low dose? Because they want it a quicker release into your system, and they're adding that test propionate. On the back end, why are they adding such a large amount of testosterone decanate, such a big ratio? Because they want a slower release of the bulk of the Sustanon. So it's released slower. So it's in your system longer. The idea behind Sustanon was for long-term use, for TRT use. It wasn't for short runs. So they wanted different esters to pick up after one another. So Euro-Pharmacy, listen, they hit the nail on the head on this. They're giving you exactly the way it should be, old school, no shenanigans, no fucking with the ratios and adding a little more test probe or adding another ester to it. They keep it the way it should be. And I know you like that, Mobster. You're old school. I know you like that.
I know what works, Steve. I was just going to jump in here and say, for example, let me expand on 1 or 2 points. The TRT use, why do we say that? Quite simply because that was almost certainly what the first intent was. And again, I'll touch upon the medical uses. Number one would be some poor bastard in bed wasting away because of a medical condition. You want something that works straight away. So, of course, previously they would have given him a single injection of a short ester, and then with a few days later give him an injection of a medium length ester, and so on and so forth. And then someone said, hey, we don't need to do that. This poor bastard's wasting away. We don't want to be jabbing him. He's already ill. He's already uncomfortable. Let's produce a product that has the short, the medium, and the longer acting esters. Then we talked about the TRT. So we said with the TRT, you do not have to use cypionate. Arguably, cypionate would be probably the number one choice for many, many years. But when we look at the use of TRT, when we look at performance enhancement, but specifically TRT, we say, does it actually have to be cypionate? Does it have to be undecanate, for example, which arguably would be the longest acting, the one with the longest half-life, the one that required the least amount of injections? I think Steve talks about a product as well. No, it can be Sustanon, because again, TRT, you want something that's in the system straight away. You want something that's going to be in the system for a couple of weeks, and you want something that's going to be in the system nearly a fucking month. That makes perfect sense. And in fact, again, that comes down to pinning frequency. I'd actually have to pin ever so slightly more frequently with a cypionate if I decided to use it. But Sustanon would be a great choice just for that reason. So that's there. Another thing that occurs to me, Steve, and this is actually going to touch upon when we talk about the stacking and stuff. I'll just touch on it now, in that I've actually pointed out to people when it comes to using Sustanon, I have actually seen people say, do I need to kickstart? And I go, no. If one of the esters is in there working its magic and has a real short half-life, propionate, why would you need to kickstart Sustanon? You do not. So that's a bit of the confusion. We're expanding that shortly. In terms of people that have messed around with it, nearly every single company that's ever tried to reinvent the wheel finds that there's a kind of pointless to it. I have seen there are a bunch of testosterone blends. You've got chest trend blends. You've got blends where they've got two kinds of testosterone. But I've only seen one product, I think Steve and I talked about this a few months ago, where it was almost identical, Steve, but I think they'd added an undecanate or a cypionate to the mix. And it was a 500 milligram per mil product. And you and I were like, maybe, but it's the only time we've seen this example. We weren't sure for the reasoning. Maybe customers had asked for it. So that's the reason why that company produced that particular product. But again, it's like reinvent the wheel. It's like, and I'll just use this analogy. It's like when they fucked with original Formula Cola, and they realized that the 5 billion sales or something, and someone decided at some meeting that we need to do a different version for whatever fucking secret formula reasons, and it just didn't work. Customers liked what they liked. There was no need to mess around with it. In terms of Sustanon, we know what works. We know what you can stack with it. Why do you need to add an extra ester? Again, like I said, maybe it was something for competing bodybuilders. Maybe someone there decided that customers actually want this, is what they're after. Is there any reason why we're not putting cypionate in it? Is there any reason why we're not adding undecanate to it? No, because the reason you don't need to do that is because the Sustanon works as is. There really is no need almost to fuck around with it. So for me, the ratios that we see in here have been proven to work time and time and time again. Okay. If there are, for example, and this is the reason why I would use it, Steve, as I talked about on other shows, if I use a product that bulks me up, Debo would be one, Anadrol for many listeners, and certainly Sustanon as a Deca, and Decanate, sorry, Deca added to as a stack for me, I know the results I'm going to get. I know that I'm going to get bigger. Typically, and I used this example before, back in the day, I would go from 280 to 300 pounds every single fucking time. It was guaranteed. And not only did I get stronger because I was using PEDs, but I got stronger because that 20 pounds on a normal height person, I'm slightly taller than normal, would be 1 inch, 2 inches, is probably an inch, inch and a half on me, and 2 inches on a person of average height. It's 10 pounds is 1 inch approximately. So 20 pounds, 2 inches. That is a lot of better leverage. That's a huge amount of size. That is a physical difference you can actually fucking notice. The only argument, Steve, would be competing bodybuilding. I certainly use this at the beginning of a competition stack, but maybe not at the end because I want to any water out. I don't need that leverage. I just need to look amazing on stage. So for me, this was guaranteed strength, guaranteed size. And that would be my reason for using it now. It can form parts of the competition cycle. There are stacks which we're going to get into, and we'll expand, as I say, on the Kickstart part of it as well. Back to you, Steve, for more thoughts.
Yeah, and that pretty much sums it up. I mean, really, like if you've never used Sustanon before, you might want to try it, especially if you're running a longer cycle, or even if you're doing TRT, or even if you're cruising or something. You might find it to be a little different. And some people say all the different esters. It's a nice clicking, click and clack, yin and yang effect, where the different esters kick in and they kind of pick up after another and they feel a little better on Sustanon. And at the end of the day, look, testosterone is testosterone, and it's not going to change the amount. If you're running 250 milligrams of Sustanon and you're running 250 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, what is the difference? Well, with the Sustanon, you're getting 4 different testosterones esters, and with the cypionate, you're just getting 1. Or if you just run enanthate by itself, or if you just run propionate by itself, you see what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. But as Mobster said, some people react better to different esters. Mobster has always said on the podcast he doesn't react good to testosterone enanthate. Maybe it's a psychological thing. Maybe it's something where the timing of the way the esters hit his body, it just doesn't work for him.
Absolutely, Steve. My buddies mostly competed as 105, so they had to be 230 pounds, 31 pounds or less. So they got stronger without getting bigger, whereas I was always used to getting stronger and bigger. So for me, I didn't really notice a discernible increase in my strength, and I certainly didn't notice, as they didn't notice, as a discernible increase in my size. So for me, it was just like, well, why am I using this then? They were, this is amazing, great. Me, I was like, me, no, whatever. Not necessarily that it didn't work as such, I guess, because it was working perfectly for them with not getting bigger, but I wanted to get bigger. Perfectly for them with strength. Well, I always got better when I got bigger. So for me, it's like, hey, why am I using this? It didn't serve my purposes. We knew that it was legitimate. We knew it was fine. And again, I go back to what I said at the beginning of the show, even down to the individual response. Is the product legit? Was the previous product from a different company underdosed or overdosed and so on? But we were all using exactly the same product. I think I might have ordered it for us, and there would be 4 users. And for me, it was a meh product, a meh drug, regardless of where it got it from, but they fucking loved it. So again, this one of the things that we emphasize, and especially when we talk about stack cycling and so on and so forth, and the reason for using it, you need to use what works for you. When we do these shows, when we specifically talk about what makes a good Sustanon, we're talking about the average response that a person gets across a great broad swathe of users: big, tall, short, wide, narrow, skinny, underweight, hard gainer, easy gainer, whatever. The numbers and suggestions and the conversations we have are either our personal ones or what works for the majority of listeners and users. So you have to have that kind of stuff in mind. But if you, for example, are doing endurance, there are certain PDs that we might recommend for strength that you shouldn't even consider, and vice versa. That makes sense, and it should do. But Sustanon, for the most part, you'll see it in a lot of stacks. You'll certainly see it when people like myself are looking to bulk up. You'll certainly, when there's not a weight restriction, like my buddies had, I didn't have a weight restriction. I've always been kind of heavy in that particular thing. When I started competing, I was very, very close to being a super heavy anyway, and so on and so forth. So again, what I wanted it for, how I respond, might not be your experience, and it might not be what you want it for. But keep that in mind when we're giving you the information that we give you. Talk about, just in terms very quickly, Steve, before we move on, the actual half-lives. How short of a half-life are we looking at with the shortest, and how long of a half-life are we looking at with the longest?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, we're starting out with a small amount of testosterone propionate. And testosterone propionate, you're looking at about 3.5 day half-life. You gotta remember, half-life is not active life, it's not detection life, it's not how long it's gonna be in your system. It's just the half-life. So meaning after 3 days, half of what you injected is still gonna be in your system. So, and then you've got the other end of the spectrum, test decanate. It's a really long half-life. We're talking 15, 16, 17-day half-life, which means that as you're building it up in your system, and once you stop using, let's say you run Sustanon for 12 weeks and stop, that test decanate is still going to be in your system 4 or 5 times the amount of the half-life. So we're talking 7, 8, 9 weeks it's still in your system. This is why when people use a long ester, they're like, well, I'm still gaining. I'm 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks after
After the cycle.
cycle, and I'm still making gains, or I'm not losing my strength. It's like, oh yeah, I'm so proud of myself. And then a few weeks later, they crash. And they're like, well, what the hell just happened? I thought the steroids were still working. No, it's not from when you stop injecting. If you stop injecting at week 12, it's not magically out of your system by week 13. It takes time
No,
to be out of your
no.
system.
I made this mistake these days. I said in another recent show that we recorded just last week, I said I should have known better. And I actually had in one of my online logs, I'm still doubling 180. I'm still doing, and it just literally, I was like, God damn. And I said this on the show, I should have known better. I literally wrote down the numbers I was doing, and I was like, wow, I've been off cycle 2 weeks and I'm still doing fantastically well. And of course, eventually the fucking penny dropped, Steve. I think I was so excited, as you said, oh yeah, you're doing fantastically well. You've had a great response. Yes, of course, motherfucker. You've literally still got half the product from the last injection in your body, you idiot. So for me, that was like I had to sort of slap myself upside my head and go, yes, at some point in another week or so, the numbers will drop. You need to back off. You need to get your head around what you're doing. So yeah, it was like that, Steve. I made that mistake. I think I just got so excited by the fact I was still strong, still making gains, and
Oh
held on to
yeah.
half my size and so on.
So one of the big mistakes you can, that people make when they're using Sustanon, for example, is they'll mistime their PCT. So they'll run 12 weeks, then they'll stop the cycle, then they'll run like a 4 or 5 week PCT, which is nothing. That's not enough time. And then they'll like go into their bridging phase, or they'll just hop back on cycle. But what happens is this esters were never even out of your system. You were
Yeah, he was
literally
on cycle.
you were running PCT while you still had testosterone in your system. So you're like, wow, the PCT is working. Wow, pom-poms, happy day, happy day. And then once your PCT is over, a couple weeks later, then you crash. You're like, fuck, my PCT didn't work. Let me just go on TRT for life. Let me give up. You've got to time it properly if you're running Sustanon. You have to give it 4, 5, 6 weeks for it to start being out of your system before you even start your PCT. So that's a big mistake people make out there when it comes to using Sustanon. So you have to correct that. If you're going to cycle Sustanon, you have to understand that. Otherwise, you're going to screw yourself up. Another thing, as I was saying, you're talking about a short half-life, only 3 days. The decanate is a long half-life, 15, 16, 17 days I've seen, even 18 days I've seen, or 19 days I've seen. And then you've got the iso and the phenylpropionate, which are more intermediate esters. So the phenylpropionate is like 5 days, maybe 4 days, and then the iso is going to be somewhere around maybe 8 or 9 days, just somewhere in there. So you've got different, but again, it depends because there's different numbers out there. I've seen numbers on propionate from 2 days to 3 days to 4.5 days. So it just depends on where you're looking at. But I'll put it this way: you got the prop, which is a short ester, the phenylpropionate and the iso, which are more intermediate esters, and the decanate, which is everyone will agree is a long ester. So that's
Yeah.
how I would categorize it, Mobster. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that, this part of that discussion I was having with my buddies yesterday, and I said, listen, guys, let's imagine that we're all using exactly the same product. And why would we see differences in, even as Steve said, because I've seen the same stuff that he's seen just back in the day when I first went online and started to look at these things in the steroid books that I've got here. Why did we see different half-lives come up? Why did we see different results from exactly the same product? And that includes the enanthate example that we gave earlier on. And I said it was for various reasons. For example, as an older user, I won't get the same response as a younger user. Someone is more obese, carries a more body fat than me, will have a different response than I might do if I had a six pack, if mine was under 10%. The obvious variables would be, if they're working physically in a job and mine's involves sitting down, tapping away on a keyboard, I would expect them to struggle to put on size and get the same response. And here's another thing, and this just comes from the science side of stuff. Whenever you see a study that does include the use of steroids, sometimes it's even stuff to do with training or particularly protein, the numbers they give you are the averages. So they'll say 20 users took X amount of protein, they all squatted, they all benched, they all did deadlifts. A couple of users did fantastically well, 20% gains, but the average gain across the board was 6.5 pounds, something like that. The same thing happens when it comes to PEDs. And again, as I touched upon earlier on, what we talked about, the numbers that we give, the ratios and so on and so forth are for the majority of listeners. But not every single person is sub 10%. Not every single person has got the genetic advantages, like, say, a professional bodybuilder should have. Some of you will be people that shouldn't be using Sustanon because you are a little bit fatter already and you get much better response if you was leaner. Some of you shouldn't be using PEDs because you're too young, or you haven't actually learned to train properly, or your diet is really, really bad. And I would fully expect to see different blood test results. I would fully expect to see different results overall. I would fully expect, even if it came down to the half-life, Steve, how much is still stored in your body, how much is, for example, if I'm a fat motherfucker and I inject into a fat area, it's going to take that much longer to get into the bloodstream. Whereas if I did actually inject it to somewhere that was leaner, had less fat coverage, and was definitely 100% into the muscle. Now, it shouldn't make a huge difference, but it will make a difference. And the problem with some of the numbers that we saw back in the day is that they were coming from studies where they weren't using performance enhancing amounts. They're quite often, most studies are young students who get free protein or dollars per day to take part in the study, and so on and so forth. They're very rarely 25 plus years of age, which is a typical PED user. Very rarely at PED uses it. They're 100, 200 milligrams. I think there's only ever been a couple of studies that have been as high as 600 milligrams, and so on. Sometimes the numbers are literally come from an older group, like myself. We did a podcast where I've mentioned the statistical data that came back on the dementia-like effects and a bunch of 60-plus tren users that were being treated with tren for a specific medical condition. None of those would have been, I think, maybe if they had 100 of them boys 60-odd years of age, maybe 1, 2, 3 of them would still be hitting the gym, which means the other 95, 96, 97 wouldn't be. So what would the results come back from that? What would the half-lives be? How many of those were skinny old motherfuckers and skinny big motherfuckers and obese and fat and so on? So I would fully expect those numbers to be different. So when we give you these numbers, like Steve said, there's a bit of a broad spectrum there, but we know, for example, that the decanate, agreeable, doesn't matter what number you look at, doesn't matter what source you look at, doesn't matter about the condition of the person. Of all the esters, it is the one that's going to be in the system longer. And the same thing with a propionate. It stings because it's a short one. That's another reason for having a smaller amount in it. But equally, doesn't matter what statistic number variable you look at, all of them agree it is a shorter ester. And you need to know these things, because if you have some knowledge of how you respond, and you, for example, let's say that you didn't really understand what a Sustanon was about, and like Steve said earlier on, you were new to the game, and you went out and bought a bunch of different esters from a Joe at the back of the gym, because that's what people do, and realized only later on you could have just used Sustanon and done exactly the same thing. Ended up with the same mix that you ended up creating yourself. Some people like to do that. They love to control their variables, but it's a very small percentage. Labs like Euro-Pharmacies sell you these products because they know this is the formula that's worked a million times before, millions of times, in fact. It's worked medically, it's worked for TRT, and it's pretty much going to work for you. It's down to you to put in the hard work and down to you to make sure that the nutrition's on point. But I would say, all things being equal, these are the reasons why these numbers exist. And that's how it gets out there. As Steve said, and I want to cover them again, Steve, just to talk about the actual options again, right? So, for example, and I actually made a note here while Steve was talking earlier on, I could put, and I think I said this on a show once before, I can see me at some point probably using the SAS 500, probably be my next actual stack, if not that stack, the stack after, if I can keep doing the bulk type stacks. Purely and simply because it comes in a 15 mil option, which is fantastic. And again, 0.5 mil, less injecting. And assuming, and I've used their product before, especially the 250 product, Steve, I don't get post-injection pain anymore. And I'm saying, if I get any post-injection pain using the product, it's normally because I'm trying to cack-handedly push the plunger down and moving the bloody needle around my muscle rather than the actual product. If I know that the 250 works for me, no big deal for me to use the 500 for that particular reason. The amps, why do the amps exist? Because some users like, for example, the option of being able to carry around and take different places the amps, but also, there's a much more percentage, Steve. I can't see that there's a lot of people still using the amps. But back in the day, the reasoning was thus: if you're going to fuck about with a product, if you're going to underdose a product or whatever else, why would you go to the trouble of producing an amp, which requires breaking open, glass molds, etc., 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 if you're going to fake a product? So that was the sort of logic behind it. And that's why we loved having amps back in the day. But I would pretty much say now, especially when it comes to a company like Euro-Pharma, which I've used multiple times, I would stick with the vial, Steve. And again, I've used the SAS 250 in the past. The most recent one was October. And as I said on other shows, when I've discussed that stack, which we're going to get into now, I went to my all-time highest body weight of, in 4 weeks, following a cut, using their Sustanon and their Deca product, and blew up to 336 pounds, which was just about the heaviest I'd been, literally maxing out the fucking scale at the local gym. I did make jokes about the damn thing telling me to get off and the bell ringing, getting my money back and all that kind of stuff, but literally the needle went past the last notch, that the measure that they had on there. I've got some electronic scales here, and I was 336 pounds, which is the heaviest I've ever been. Let's talk about how we would dose and stack these, Steve, because that's, I think, where what listeners really want to know.
So let me give a little, rant and educational here, and I'll bring in Mobster. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there on everything. Okay, any idiot can start up their own, YouTube channel or Instagram or whatever, right? And you can, build it up and buy followers and, network with people and stuff. And what ends up happening is people start putting out misinformation, and instead of correcting their misinformation, they'll just reinforce it. And we see that all the time in life with everything. And when it comes to nutrition, I see this all the time with nutritionists. They'll write a book on something, and then 5 years later we'll have legitimate studies come out saying what they wrote a book about was wrong. But instead of them admitting, yeah, my book was wrong, don't buy my book, I'm going to write a new book with updated information, they double down, they triple down, they keep saying, oh yeah, don't, oh, you need 500 grams of protein a day or your muscles will shrink up. Yeah, that. And they'll double down or triple down on it. And it's because, it's that Kruger effect of I'm an expert, I'm the guru, everyone else is wrong. So it's very important that when we see misinformation, that we call it out. And that's what this platform is for. That's why Mobster and I have this podcast. One of the reasons is very, very important. So one of the misinformations that we see with Sustanon is people who claim that you're supposed to inject it every day or every other day, which makes no fucking sense. We literally just went through the esters.
Yeah.
You
None.
have to, when you're doing a blend, you have to pay attention to what's in the blend. You can't just say, oh, it's got testosterone probe, so let's go with that. Let's inject it how we're supposed to inject testosterone probe. Okay? We have to look at the whole thing. You're talking out of 250 milligrams, only 30 milligrams is propionate. Only 30, which means 220 milligrams is something else. So we're talking 90% of the formula is something else. So why should we go off of the 10%, the tiny 10%? It doesn't make any sense. So we have to, number two, understand how esters work. They slow release. So when you inject something that has an ester attached, it's not in and out of your system within an hour. If you want that, go get testosterone-based testosterone suspension, which Euro-Pharmacies has, by the way, and it'll be in and out of your system. That's why people take it pre-workout, or people who take it, they don't want to be detected because it's in and out of your system, right?
Yes.
But with an ester, the reason esters are attached, the whole idea is to slow release. So with Sustanon, you're getting most of Sustanon is slow releasing long or intermediate esters. So we should treat it the way it was designed, which was to inject a larger amount infrequently, not frequently with a small amount, but a large amount infrequently. So the way that it's designed to be used, and this is what the pharmacy companies that actually produce Sustanon say that you're supposed to use it, and TRT doctors and endocrinologists that are actually educated and not just businessmen pretending to be doctors, which they're not.
They just want your money.
They just want your money, anti-aging clinics or whatnot. The way you're supposed to run it is every 2 to 3 weeks, you do the amount you want. So if you're running it for TRT, you do 1 cc, which is 250 milligrams, every 2 to 3 weeks. And that will give you that will slow release in your body over time. So after, let's say 8 weeks or 10 weeks, it reaches peak in your system. So now you're continuously injecting it, and you're getting a balanced amount leaving your system and a balanced amount coming into your system, and you're comfortable throughout. That's the cruising dose or the TRT dose way to do it. Now, if you're running a 12-week cycle, it's a little different if you want to use Sustanon, because you don't want to, you don't want to stretch it out where your first injection is day 1 and your next injection is another 2 to 3 weeks. So in that situation, you can go ahead and inject it once a week or twice a week, perfectly fine. So really, those are the ways to run it. But the correct way to run it would be a large amount infrequently to allow the esters to pick up after one another. So that's how it works, because you've got the 4 different esters, and they each have different half-lives. And you go from a propionate all the way up to a decanate, which is a really, really long ester. So you have to, if you inject Sustanon like every day or every other day, you're actually making things worse, because you're making things, you're not allowing it to get into your system and start doing its job of slow releasing over a long period of time. So if you do a tiny amount every day, think about it in your mind, you're actually not getting the benefits of Sustanon the way you should, and you're actually going to notice that you're not getting that peak once you start getting into week 6, week 7, week 8. You're getting a tiny amount every day, you see? So it's about injecting it the correct way, the way it was designed to be injected. Otherwise, you might as well just go, if you want to inject every day, go get testosterone propionate from Euro-Pharmacies.
Yeah, exactly.
And just do it that way, because then it would actually be correct in the body. It would release in a correct way throughout your body, and it would reach peak in about a week and a half or 2 weeks correctly. If you do with Sustanon, it's not going to reach peak anyway. The Sustanon is not going to reach peak for 7, 8, 9 weeks, even if you do it every day at a smaller amount. It's not going to make a difference. So you have to run it the correct way, which is a larger amount right off the bat, then another large amount in a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. That's how you would do it. So if I was running Sustanon, I would, for a 12-week cycle, I would do it once or twice a week, max. Really, once a week would be ideal. And if you're doing it for a cruise or TRT, you want to inject a larger amount every 2 to 3 weeks. So if you do 250 every 2 weeks, you're getting 125 milligrams per week in your system. If you do 250 every 3 weeks, you're getting a third of that in your system. So a little less than 100 milligrams. Does that make sense? So about
Let me
80
expand.
milligrams.
Yeah, let me expand on my own use last time. Now, of course, preface on what Steve said about the peaks 6-7 weeks in, I was running a cut stack immediately before the bulk stack, so I still had esters in my system. Otherwise, normally I would have run it longer. Again, as Steve said, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. My favorite stacks back in the day when it comes to Sustanon was always Sustanon and Deca. And I preferred at that particular time, although I might expand it, as Steve said, to once a week. At that time, I was running it roughly every fourth day. So, for example, first injection would be Monday, the next injection would be either Thursday or Friday. That means 3, maybe a little bit over 3 times a fortnight. And that worked absolutely perfect for me in terms of the numbers. And typically, I was using, as I most recently did again in October, a 250 version of Sustanon. So if the blend or the SUS 250 being identical, this would be around a total of the two combined was around, typically in the past, around a 900 milligram, a little bit less mark, which would be a little bit under 2 mil of each. Pushing that out to, as my most recent one, again, 4-week shorter, but following the cut stack that I'd previously done, it was a little bit over 1,050 milligrams. In other words, a fraction over 2 mil per week of each product. And in fact, arguably, as what we just talked about, the cut product required me to inject every other day or at least 3 times a week. A lot easier having a cut back to a way more comfortable every 4th/5th day option for me in terms of injection. No problem with injection per se. I've got more comfortable with it as I got older, but I'm still not a major fan of multiple pins jabbing more frequently and so on and so forth. I'll expand on something that we touched upon earlier, Steve, when we talked before we talk about Euro-Pharmacies properly, and that is the business with Kickstarting that we sometimes see. And again, like Steve just said, the idea people doing it more frequently, every second day, every day, and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes that literally just comes down to ignorance. And one of the problems and one of the issues, and I'll expand on that as well. So let me do the Kickstart thing first. No need to Kickstart. You've got it in there. So there's no need to do that whatsoever. On the expert thing that Steve said earlier on, I'll do that before I bring Steve back in for another stack. What sometimes happens, and certainly used to happen a lot, Steve, is that they were reiterating the same information that they'd read somewhere else. So we used to have, bless, we don't have anymore, or at least we don't have on the forums anymore. We might still have it already. The 15-year-old basement expert who'd read a book or an article on steroids and then would read this information out as though it was golden. God help us, Steve. I'm just thinking of Death in a Locker Room type books written by very well-known would-be gurus. I'm thinking of one particular person with the initial B and G, and they would look for the worst examples they could find in medical literature, which might be a handful out of millions and millions of users, in other words, not typical, cite this as golden information. It would then be repeated in the media, specifically the news. That person would become semi-famous at the time, well-known, and if it was on YouTube, get the views. And literally they were spouting what amounted to being nonsense. So the problem was, and this is what sometimes still happens, you've got one of the things that I always say people should do when it comes to certain information, including the information that Steve and I put out, is go off and verify what we're saying is correct. Don't just take it as golden, go off and check. And if it doesn't stand up, if the data doesn't stand up, you have access now to information via medical studies, via essays that have been written, the reasons why certain people got their doctorates, etc., 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 and they've looked at a particular angle or something that hasn't been looked at before, you can go and read that data for yourself. It wasn't possible back in the day. It's why people got famous for saying things that they were able to say. I'm thinking of one particular YouTuber, Stephen, whose name escapes me, sat there filling the magazines of his fucking guns while he was talking about steroids, and that was kind of his stick. People watched him probably more for that than they did for the actual information he was putting out. The problem is some people believe the information. The guy's borderline a fucking psycho, and you're taking steroid information off him. God help me, Steve. One
Yeah.
of the people that's actually helped me in the past before he passed away was kind of nuts himself, and that would be the late Paul Borison. And some of his stuff was deliberately done specifically to get a certain particular reaction. Some of the stacks that he come up with were the divorce stack, the billionaire stack, the I don't give a damn about my liver stack. And these were half tongue in cheek, but equally that ends up becoming information that people would listen to 10 mil, 25 mil, 30 mil a week. But you don't need that. Most listeners don't need that. Most users don't need that. But unfortunately, sometimes that information ends up being cited. Paul said this. Paul's dead. Paul did stupid shit. Paul was doing stuff sometimes just for the crack of creating a crazy stack. That doesn't mean you should do it, especially if you do give a fuck about your liver. So make sure you verify the information. Is this what makes a good sus? Is this the way that it should be used? Do I need to do a kickstart? No, yes, no, and so on and so forth. Double check the information. What about you, Steve? If you was
Yeah.
running sus, what would you run it with?
So I did do the Sustanon Deca myself as well. So I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you can't gain size and strength on that stack, then find a new hobby because it's a tremendous stack. Your appetite's going to be insane. Your libido is going to
Yes.
be insane. You're going to be want to do nothing, then quote unquote do it and eat
Eat
and
it.
work out. Those are basically the three things you're going to want to do on this stack. So that's a good stack for bulking. Now you can use Sustanon for cutting as well. You would do a smaller amount, you know,
Yeah.
and then add in some Primo or add in some Equipoise, and you could do a recomp using it. You can add in an oral with it. Euro-Pharmacies has a whole array of orals. One of the best orals for cutting and recomp is going to be Anavar. So what you could do is you could run the Sustanon. If you're a good reactor to testosterone, you like the way testosterone makes you feel, you like the way testosterone helps you cut, you could run, let's say, 500 milligrams of Sustanon per week, or you could do 250 milligrams of Sustanon per week, whatever you want, and then add 40 to 50 milligrams of Anavar. That would be also another really, really option. And so Euro-Pharmacies has you covered across the board. And we'll get into more Euro-Pharmacy stacks on future episodes. But really on this one, we wanted to focus on Sustanon Quality, and that was really, really important. So look, the bottom line is a lot of you out there have been using gear, and a lot of you have been using gear that's been underdosed. That's not what it
Yes.
says. You don't know
Yeah.
what's in it. How the hell are you supposed to know that the Sustanon is what it claims? If you go get blood work, okay, on Sustanon, and you're running, let's say, 500 milligrams a week, you go get the uncapped testosterone, your testosterone levels come into the 3,000s or 4,000s. You're like, yeah, this is good. This is good Sustanon. My testosterone levels are coming in high. That doesn't mean shit because you don't know. They could just be giving you testosterone E or testosterone CYP. You might not be getting the different blend of esters as you should as Sustanon, but you're paying a little more for the Sustanon. So it's important to trust what you're putting into your body and know that you're not getting ripped off. What's this? What's you think sources over the years haven't done that? You think Sustanon have sources over the years have sold you? Sustanon is going to be more expensive because you have to put the blends together. It's got to be the right
Yeah.
dosing. You know, they have to measure it and all that stuff, right? So of course it's going to be more. Testosterone sip, an underground lab, someone who's making this in his bathtub, it's probably costing him like $5 or $10 to make the vial. Okay, especially if he's doing it with a buddy and they're doing it in bulk. So then he's turning around and selling you Sustanon for more money when it only costs him like $5 or $10 to do. I would say I'd put my foot down right now, Mobster, and say that these underground labs out there where they're making this bathtub gear in the middle of nowhere in a trailer, I would say none of their Sustanon is legit. None. Because how would they even know that they're blending it correctly? There's no way
Yeah.
to even know that. You think they're taking their batches and sending it off to be tested to verify that? You think they do that on each and every blend? They wouldn't be able to make money. So I think it's bullshit. So if you're going to use Sustanon Quality, the only way you're going to get Sustanon Quality is if you use a trusted brand like Euro-Pharmacies. That's the only way. You're never going to find it. The guy who is the
Let
white
me jump
van,
in for a
yeah.
second here, Steve. I literally, again, just had this conversation with those guys yesterday when I was talking about response. And I said, I know who they get their product from. and I'm not going to mention his name on the show. He's a good guy, but he's relying, the good guy, on the companies or the people that are supplying him with the product to sell to his buddies to be legit. And the sources won't be the same all the time. It won't be the same lab all the time. It won't be the same brand all the time. So is that because the product was no good, or is it literally just because there's enough of that product to sell under someone else for them to sell to my buddies? And that's probably the truth. There's a margin, and so on and so forth. And if it works this time, great. If it doesn't work this time, never mind. We can always get better product next time. That's how that works. We still see people occasionally, thank goodness not that often now, Steve, but occasionally, maybe once a month, oh, this is what my buddy can get. Or this is what my gym dealer has. That's even worse, Steve. And I'm like, you're not talking about brands. It could be some sort of generic thing. It's just horrendous. And I've been there. I've brought stuff like that. I paid a premium price back in the day for a very well-known steroid guru here in the United Kingdom that was probably about 30-40% more expensive than anybody else, but the stuff that came in was good to go every fucking time. Whereas I'd have been rolling the dice, buying from a different source in a different way, almost certainly some sort of gym dealer back in the day. Now, and I've used this phrase before, you've never had it so good, guys. We have resellers that have multiple brands, and the reseller themselves is a trusted supplier. And then the companies that sell direct will not only have a single company product that they distribute for and on behalf of that company. And that would be, for it's a good example of the kind of distributors and resellers that you see with Euro-Pharmacies. And again, you've used the product, you've tried the product, you've seen the product tested, you know it's good to go. Just as the example that Steve gave, even if Steve and I set up a quote unquote underground lab, I don't think in the normal scheme of things, without the proper machinery in a proper lab, that Steve and I, even with our best work, would be able to 100% of the time get the ratios exactly the right every single fucking time. If we weren't using the proper equipment with the proper scales, which cost tens of thousands of dollars, and set up the lab properly with a proper production line, and even if everything else was good to go, it would be difficult for us to get it right. That's another reason why you use a company like Euro-Pharmacies, purely and simply because they are literally down to the microgram. The scales that they will use, I believe, are somewhere between 20 and 10 and somewhere anywhere between 10 and $30,000. I've seen numbers for. We've seen photographs of companies that we approve and use, like Euro-Pharmacies, where they have videos and pictures of the production process, and every single item, every single thing in the frame is being shown to us is proper pharmaceutical company quality equipment in a proper setup. Euro-Pharmacies itself is based off in Europe, Steve. I know that for a fact because it says so on their site. And the process and the way that they put these products together is a 20 plus, I think it's coming up on 30 years experience. I believe the date they've given needs updating because I believe it's very, very close to 30 years. You don't get to last in this business in that particular regards if you're putting out poor quality product. And again, variables. If I buy a product, Sustanon, over the counter, in a gym, off my dealer, I've got no idea what I'm getting. I would literally have to have it sent off, testing purposes, etc., etc. And I've seen companies' products where they have failed and come back to us. Listen, make sure you use a quality source like Euro-Pharmacies because they've been around a long ass time, because they're trusted, because their product gets tested, because they do in-house testing themselves. I've seen stuff, again, this is via the resellers themselves on behalf of Euro-Pharmacies, where products have cocked up, there's been a mistake, they've gone to one outside source to have a particular product produced, and it was a mistake, and they fixed that problem in days. That's the thing. And I personally they are my number one go-to source all the time, Steve. So yeah, when it comes to Sustanon, make sure the information is correct, run it right, keep a note on the simple fact that it needs to have those ratios of esters perfectly, and that you are understandably using short, medium, and long-acting esters, and understand the process of how that's going to work in your body, and make sure that it suits what your purpose is, suits what you're doing. If you want any information in that regards, hit us up on the forums, post comments below. What's your favorite Sustanon and other option cycle? Let us know how you would stack and run it. and the best results we've had so that readers and listeners can understand how they can get great results too. We're always going to be interested. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast of informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.